Hey guys, quick video on state. So took a month off, doing some approaches, cold approaches again today, walking around, and I found it interesting that I never really made this juxtaposition before. There's two things that tend to get me in state, or get me in state and get me in set. And those two things are monitoring my environment for targets, number one, which allows me to get in sets that I want to be in, that I'm motivated to be in, which is a huge factor contributing to success. Number one. Number two is actually like getting warmed up. And there's these two, it's kind of like two mental states. I mean, if you look in the psychology literature, there's all sorts of distinctions made that I won't go into, but one is just basic approach and avoidance motivation. And if you're constantly monitoring your environment, you're rehearsing a mental state of vigilance. And getting into that state allows you to look ahead. You know, if you're walking around, you're doing street game, you need to be very, very vigilant of your environment in order to identify targets. Number one. Number two, you need to be you need to have a positive social expectations of interactions. And the way in which you get that's like when you have positive expectancies of social interactions, that's effectively being in state. Or that's perhaps one operational definition of being in state, is when you expect when you expect good things to happen when you approach. When you expect positive reactions when you do an approach. So like when I'm going out, when I've had good nights, I'm doing approaching as like in the middle of the day or as soon as I leave the house, and it's kind of like the idea of working an entire room, like working 100 set instead of just a 2 set or a 3 set, one at a time. You're working the whole room. Like you can think of that as like applying to your entire schedule throughout the day. So like instead of 100 set, it's like 1,000,000 set if you're in New York City. You're working the entire city at once. So like everybody you approach isn't necessarily going to provide you with some kind of instrumental value to help you in subsequent interactions, but it is going to get you in a state of like approach, of positive expectations from social interactions. And that can be like, you know, when you say hi to somebody, particularly if it's not like a very high caliber girl, most people are polite. I mean, I suppose there are people who are not polite to strangers who say hello, but like you can make small talk with people even if they're hired guns or something like that. So there's these two things that I'm talking about. One is approaching in preparation for your session, your cold approach session, such that like you're getting yourself into an approach mode and monitoring your environment as well, like building a mentality of vigilance. And so you don't actually need targets in order to rehearse those two features of the mental state that you want to get into for a cold approach. And that's great because I think that there's a tendency to not get into mental state or not start worrying about it until you're in a position to approach a target that you're interested in. And that sets you up to like basically confront all of the anxiety and confront 100% of the transition, like all at once. The transition that is getting from, you know, not being in state into state. So these are two things, you know, monitoring your environment, being vigilant, and, you know, approaching non-targets. Those are two things that can kind of get you into state, into the right type of state. And it's interesting to juxtapose those two. Those are two very different psychological states. One is a state of approach, one is a state of inhibition or avoidance. I won't go into the theory as to why that is, but you know, I could discuss that in another video. Thank you.